Given that the books I'm writing are science fiction, it makes sense that a lot of the subjects of the videos thus far have been about those more alien sides of the stories, the science, the lore, and so forth. However, given what the channel is called, what the books are called, and what I've said about them already in kind of overview terms, there are other sides to these stories, specifically in this case, mythological ones, which I would be amiss to just completely ignore in these videos. So that's what we're going to be covering today, at least as a first example of it. Hello and welcome to the Ragnarok Chronicles. My name is Dominic and as I say, I just want in this video, rather than going into depth within any particular mythological stories, I'm just going to be doing a bit of an overview of a few different things. In the future, I may well do videos that are just dedicated to longer specific stories, like there are various tales about Thor that I could go into detail of, maybe I do a video of a few of those and so forth. But for this one, I'm instead actually going to be covering the mythological terms that I've been putting in some of this channel's Instagram's posts. If you don't follow us on Instagram, or me, whatever, the link to that is in the description of this video, as it is in all of them, as are the links to all the other social medias. But yes, as part of that, some of the posts that I do are just of things within the various mythologies that I am looking at, so that you may peruse them yourself if you find them interesting. I have done a number of these thus far. In this video, I'm just going to be covering the first 10, and again, if I do this down the line again, if it's not for a video that is dedicated to specific stories, it could be what are the next 10 posts I did, and so forth. As such, because this is just a bit of a medley of a few different things, we're going to be going backwards and forwards between a few different mythologies, and there's also going to be varying depths of detail that we're going to go into. Some of them may just be a description of one or two sentences, others I'll go on to for a little bit longer. So, the first mythological post that I did there, aptly, was more generally about the event Ragnarok itself. Now, as it happens, Ragnarok is such a thing that I could go into lots of detail about the various events that take place within it, or the different warnings that happened beforehand. Or rather, because it's kind of prophetic as to how the world will end, what will be the warnings. I'll just talk about one of them, though, for now, which is about the death of a god called Baldr. I should actually also give the disclaimer at this point that my pronunciations of names at various places are not going to be perfect, most likely, so I apologise on that front if you are more knowledgeable on how these words should be pronounced. At some point, it shall be foreseen that the god Baldr will die, and it's known that this death will be one of the first portenses of Ragnarok taking place, this conflict between the gods that shall end all of current cosmology, with a couple of exceptions at the very end of the tale. But it's a massive event that they want to avoid. The gods know it's going to be coming, but it's more a matter of so long as it can keep on being put off, then that's for the better. Now, knowing that Baldr's death is going to be one of these warnings and omens of it happening, his mother goes around and gets everything in the universe to make an oath that they will never harm Baldr. And once these oaths are all made, it actually becomes a kind of game among the gods that they can just throw things at Baldr, and it's known that they won't hurt him, so throw rocks and sticks and so forth, and he's completely fine, because those objects have promised that they won't cause him any harm. The mischievous Loki, however, goes and asks, well, actually, did you get an oath from absolutely everything? To which he's told, well, no, we couldn't get mistletoe to agree, but it's so small and innocent, then what's the harm in that? With this knowledge, Loki then later goes to the blind god Höðr, who hasn't been able to join in these games of kind of, I presume Baldr's fine with it, but just with the gods like showing that he's completely invulnerable. He's blind, he's not able to join in, and Loki says, okay, here, hold this, I'll guide your hand, you can now throw it. Obviously not telling him that what he's holding is mistletoe, the one thing in the universe that hasn't promised not to harm Baldr. As such, he goes flying and kills Baldr stone dead. Realising what has happened, there are subsequently other events where some of the gods try to go down into the underworld to try to bargain such that Baldr can be brought back to life. You have scenes to do with his funeral, but from that point on, it's acknowledged, to quote Avengers, we're in the endgame now. So that's just, again, I could go into a lot more about Ragnarok, but that's just one detail I'll mention here. The second post to do with mythology on Instagram was then to do with Nidhogger. Again, apologies for the pronunciation. You'll obviously have to see the spelling on the screen. Now, before we talk about that, let's actually take a step backwards to have a greater view of Norse cosmology itself, specifically to do with the world tree Yggdrasil. Now, this is kind of like an ash tree that grows throughout the universe that kind of all the 9 worlds are connected to. Now, the actual specificity of the 9 worlds themselves has actually changed slightly over time depending on which Norse text you are looking at. Typically, you would be looking at Asgard, which is where the group of gods known as the Æsir live. You've got Alfheim, which is where the light elves live. You've got Midgard, which is Earth. You've got Muspelheim, which is the realm of fire, where Surtr lives. Nidavellir, where the dwarves live. Niflheim, which is more the realm of ice. And just for context as well, Midgard is specific to Earth, is specifically what separates the fire realm from the ice realm, Muspelheim and Niflheim. Svartalfheim, that would be number 8, Svartalfheim, which is the realm of the dark elves. And then you have Vanaheim, which is home to a different group of gods known as the Vanir. Now, as I say, this has tweaked slightly. In other interpretations, Nidavellir and Svartalfheim are merged together. They're just a single realm with the dwarfs and the black elves, and instead the 9th realm is Hell, which is the general realm of the dead, those who didn't end up in the Hall of Valhalla, those who died heroes. So that's just, as a side context, those are the 9 worlds that the world tree Yggdrasil is kind of growing and connecting to. You have other cosmic creatures that are living upon Yggdrasil, and I'm probably going to address some of those another time. But as I already say, what we're talking about now is Nidhogger, the dragon that lives within the roots at the bottom. At least from what I've been able to tell, if you look into the etymology of the name itself, it does derive from a sentiment to do with villain in general. So this creature, this dragon, is already painted in a negative light. But yes, it's kind of languishing at the bottom of the tree near Hell, kind of just within the roots. Third post about another Norse creature was then Fenrir, who you may be able to presume is a wolf if you aren't aware of this creature specifically because of Fenrir Greyback in the Harry Potter series. This is one of Loki's 6 children, and yes, he is a monstrous wolf. Now, there is another tale within which the god Tyr tries to restrain Fenrir and successfully does so, but loses his hand in the process. However, the main other time that Fenrir is going to come about is, again, during the events of Ragnarok itself, where he will break free, the lower jaw will go to the ground, upper jaw up to the heavens, and he will consume that which is in between. It is a beast to be feared, unlike another Norse creature that begins with F, Fjalar, which is instead just a red rooster, which lives in the forest of Gálgviðr, and its crowing, its call out to the treetops is yet another one of these heralds and omens of the oncoming of the event Ragnarok. So listen out for a red rooster or cockerel making its sound in a forest. Now, of course, because it is the Ragnarok Chronicles, I was therefore in those first few posts of that ilk focusing on Norse mythology. However, as I have also stressed previously, I am looking to cover multiple mythologies, as many as I really can, across all of these 55 books. Therefore, it was about this time that I also wanted to start doing other bits from your other mythologies as well. So, this first breakaway one was Hathor from Egyptian mythology. Now, there are a number of different kinds of mythologies which have less than simple family trees. However, I find that Egyptian mythology is particularly complex and annoying to try to wrap your head around and translate into other kinds of stories. Now, for instance, in this case, Hathor is simultaneously, according to different bits of the mythology, the mother of the god Ra, the sun god, his consort, and his daughter. There's kind of 3 roles around him. It's all kind of annoyingly complicated. But in general, she is the goddess of fertility, women, love, and the sky in general. Because again, Ra being the sun, she is then the sky to him. She's generally depicted with a body of a woman, but the head of a cow, just as how a lot of Egyptian deities are depicted with animalistic body parts. Or alternatively, sometimes she's just depicted with completely taking a cow form. And while again, as far as I can tell, the Egyptians didn't have a prophecy about the end of the world in the same way that the Norse do and other mythologies do. So there was still a suggestion of how the world might come to an end. In general, the creation myth from Egyptian mythology generally revolves, as others do around the world, of the world as coming out of kind of a cosmic sea. To put it very simply. And similarly, again from what I can tell, the end would kind of be a reverse of this, where everything just returns to the sea as well. But in those few kind of hints of how it might happen, Hathor also does play a role. So again, she is important in kind of those wider aspects as well as just her usual, this is what she is the goddess of, this is her personal relationships to these other gods here and there. Returning back to Norse briefly, you then had the goddess Idun, who was kind of the goddess of youth. Again, slightly more to that as well, put simply. She grows these particular apples, and anyone who eats these apples will retain a youthfulness and a vigour about them. This is actually how all of the gods, or most of them presumably, retain their youthfulness. And we know this because in one tale where Loki gets the giant Thjazi to abduct Idun and her apples, the rest of the gods start to age now that they can't eat those apples anymore. And of course, the gods then forced Loki to right his wrong to get Idun back, so he transformed himself into a falcon to fly over, and then, depending on the version of the tale you're reading, he either turned her into a nut or a sparrow, and either way he then picked her up in his falcon talons and flew her back to Asgard, and then he could eat more apples, and then they became youthful again. Greek now. You have Pandora. Now again, Pandora is one of those, well, first of all, you may be more likely to know about her, even if you haven't researched or learnt as much about mythology in general, because you may have heard of Pandora's box. However, it is one of those tales which again has different variations that have occurred over time. In general, though, the inciting incident involves Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and giving it to humanity, and gods such as Zeus being angry about this. Now, in what I believe is the earliest versions of this tale, it's more that Zeus then created Pandora as kind of the punishment herself, that she was given to humanity to then bring about kind of all these negative consequences. And this version of the tale does appear to just be kind of a sexist warning against the liberties of women, that women are dangerous and need to be controlled, which is obviously not a great message to be spreading. So rather instead, I would focus on the other version of the tale, which I at least was more familiar with first, wherein instead it was the box, or more specifically a jar. The reason why we think of it as a box now is just due to subsequent mistranslations. But she was given this jar as a wedding present, and she was basically told, you should just never open it, however. So it was a gift to you from the gods, but never open it. Of course, curiosity overcame her and she did open it, and this then released all of the negativity into the world, with just hope being left inside. There are various ways of trying to interpret what it means, what is the rationale of hope staying in the jar. But yes, it was more, rather than Pandora being the punishment herself, she was a mechanism by which the punishment from Zeus was put upon humanity instead. Okay, so that's Norse, Egyptian and Greek, those more traditionally considered mythologies. I don't know if there are people still in the world who would argue that they believe in these mythologies. I believe there will be some people. But the reason I'm specifying this now is that the next thing I'm going to talk about comes instead from Christianity, which is obviously a major world religion still. Now, as ever when I'm doing these reinterpretations for the purpose of these stories, I'm obviously never looking to actually be commenting in either way on people's beliefs, current or beforehand. It's just taking inspiration from those stories and creating something else from it. But yeah, just given that caveat there, the first thing I'm going to speak of from Christianity is Abaddon. Now, Abaddon has actually been reinterpreted in a few different pieces of media and entertainment franchises. In general, as Christianity has as a world religion, there are already loads of different things that have made use of that religious lore. But specifically, going back to the original texts, Abaddon actually is simultaneously a name given to a place of destruction as well as an angel of the abyss. I think it's only ever more like said in mention. It's not like Abaddon appears as a figure as others would do. It's more just references, definitely in the Book of Revelations and a few other places as well. So just given as this, additionally, the accolade of being the king of locusts, which again, if you look at that point in the Book of Revelations, there are a number of not very nice descriptions given surrounding that, and that which will meet those who do not bear the sigil of God at the hands of Abaddon. Elsewise, from Christianity, kind of in a tangential way, you have the Mexican folk figure of Santa Muerte. So if we're looking at kind of Central America, Southern America, especially in your pre-Columbian mythologies and belief systems, there was already a lot of deification of death as a figure. That's why you also have things like Day of the Dead in those parts of the world. But when you had the Spanish coming over to those parts of the world, bringing with them Catholicism, you ended up with kind of a blending of the two. You had this idea of a personification of death blending with more the saint-like figures from Catholicism, so Santa Muerte, originally, I believe, being a male figure, but by now has transitioned to become a female figure, usually represented as a skeleton of some description. She offers to her devotees general protection, healing, as well as safe delivery into the afterlife after death itself. Now, Catholicism does look down on this. They view people who believe in Santa Muerte or worship Santa Muerte as being a cult. However, especially in the 21st century, the modern day, those who are turning to her instead as a figure for guidance, those numbers are growing, from what I understand. And then lastly, for these 10, a much smaller one, both in terms of how much there is to say and just literally, you have Ratatoskr. We've returned to Yggdrasil, the Norse world tree. We mentioned before how there were some creatures living upon it, with Nidhogg being at the bottom. Well, you also have this squirrel, Ratatoskr, who carries messages up and down the tree. So, those were our first 10 that I was going to cover in this video. As always, I can't talk about everything in mythology in this kind of case, especially when I'm trying to cover a variety of them in one go. And also, kind of on the same note, I would never profess to fully understand all of the mythologies. There's so much detail and source text and source materials to go through that while I do, when I'm researching for the books and developing these characters and the notes, I try to read as much as possible, to understand as much as possible. It's unlikely that I'm going to have a perfect understanding of everything, and also while those details may be in the notes, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be remembering them off the top of my head here as well for the purposes of this video. So if you are yourself more knowledgeable about these kind of things, or maybe not, if not about the individuals I've talked about in this video, then if instead more knowledgeable about other figures, either from those same mythologies or other ones that you're interesting, you find fascinating, or would be fun to talk about, be sure to just leave suggestions of those or start talking about them amongst yourselves in the comments of this video. Otherwise, I hope you found this interesting. We'll be returning more to the book-specific stuff next week, and until then, just keep on telling stories.